Now, the Southern African Development Community, SADC, is to hold an extraordinary summit of heads of state and government to review progress of the SADC mission in Mozambique. SADC's presidents and heads of state will meet in Lilongwe in Malawi to discuss issues affecting the Southern Africa region. Malawi's President Lazarus Chakwera, in his capacity as SADC chairperson, will chair the summit. SADC said that the summit will, among other key issues, discuss support for the effective operation of SADC's mission in Mozambique. The SAMIM arrived in Mozambique in July 2021 to spearhead a regional response to militants' attacks in Cabo Delgado. Almost 1 million people have been displaced and more than 3,000 civilians killed since 2017 in Mozambique. The extraordinary SADC organ on politics, defense and security cooperation, hosted by its chairperson, President Cyril Ramaphosa, will convene on Wednesday. Well, for more on this, we're now joined by Professor Patrick Bond from the University of the Western Cape's School of Governance. Thanks very much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the program.
It's great to be with you. A little correction, now University of Johannesburg, Department of Sociology. Thanks, Peter. And this is such an important meeting, right, to assess whether we have progress.
Right. Well, let's chat a little bit about that, because we see that the SADC forces in Mozambique are in a little bit of distress because of resources. We heard an impassioned plea by our International Relations Minister, Dr. Naledi Pandor. What can be done? Because one gets a sense that, you know, we can have as many good wishes and good meaning as we can, but do we have the resources?
It's the right time to ask that question before we have more body bags returning to South Africa. Corporal Tebogo Khadebe on December 22nd was the first SANDF soldier, and there have been others from the rest of the SAMIM mission, the SADC regional mission, from Lesotho, Tanzania, Botswana. And I think these tragedies added to what we're not too sure about, the Rwandans, who are quite opaque about their fighters. And they're much more on the front line with the Al-Shabaab insurgents. But what we don't really know is whether there's only a displacement of these guerrillas rather than their defeat. Occasionally, a camp is overrun. At some point, 23 casualties, insurgent deaths were recorded. But really, it's very hard to know whether this is simply SANDF troops, SAMIM, the Rwandans, moving the guerrillas around rather than defeating them. And then the big question is, why are they there? Are they to protect the region from a potential Islamic threat? Are they there for multinational oil companies, Total, ExxonMobil, Eni from Italy, China National Petroleum, potentially Sasol, which would like to get gas pipelines from Cabo Delgado to Gauteng? And if so, what's the, let's say, subsequent damage when all that methane gas from the fourth largest field in the world is actually burned, creating more climate chaos? And of course, in 2019, it was in Cabo Delgado that the Cyclone Kenneth did such incredible damage, along with Cyclone Idai a couple of months earlier. And those cyclones will just get worse as the Mozambique Channel warms up, as we basically combust more fossil fuels. It's a terrible set of ironies that our troops are there defending Western and Chinese companies to create more climate chaos, which creates more unrest and more misery in Cabo Delgado.
So I actually want us to go back a little bit, 2017, when this insurgency started. And I'm curious to try and understand why nothing was done for at least 4 years. And yet we saw this insurgency grow legs. We saw people getting displaced in numbers. And we saw the Mozambican authorities struggle, but wanting to almost downplay it. Surely the time to act should have been a few years ago.
Yes, I think, Peter, what's happening with northern Mozambique, I apologize for the connection. Yeah. Go ahead.
Carry on.
I think what's happened is that the Mozambican military was unveiled as corrupt and incompetent. This is not a controversial accusation, and it's why EU troops, US troops have gone in, along with South African mercenaries, right? The Dike Action Group came in after the Russians, the Wagner group, were kind of pushed out in 2019, and in 2020, Wagner took over, and in 2021, their contract ended, and the Paramount Group, which is a sort of military supply with their own armed forces, the Burnham Group from England, they've just acquired. So we've seen South Africans, and as Lionel Dike says, he's a self-described Rhodesian, move into this area, which has been under such incredible turmoil because of not just al-Shabaab, but general unrest and the failure to do anything proper about redistributing the resources. It's a rich area with rubies, with hardwood timber that's being taken out, especially by Chinese firms. But this wealth is just not being redistributed, and the Mozambique military is very much part of the sort of looting. There was a bit of drug trafficking there as well, a real mess. And that's why when finally in 2021, in late March, the Total site at Palma, Total had a place just around the corner, and that was attacked, and many people were killed, including one South African and one Brit. And that meant there was much more attention to, first Total pulled out, and to whether the gas fields, with hundreds of billions of dollars worth of gas potentially, should actually be developed, or instead should there be, as many in civil society have asked, a move to leave those resources underground and to get a climate debt payment. So it's a mix of these factors. But since 2017, as you said, Peter, it's been a mess because the Mozambican army has been just so terribly weak and frankly corrupt.
All right, we're going to talk about this resource curse just now, but just before we get there, part of the reason why I asked this question is, then what is the point of these meetings? Because it seems to me it's internal governance issues that are at the root of much of these problems, and the SADC heads of state can sit and discuss until the cows come home, but if they're not going to call out Maputo and for them to deal with those internal issues, then one can't see how progress can be made.
Yeah, I know you're right. And, the SADC meetings on and on in 2021, only in the middle of the year succeeded in persuading the Mozambicans that there should be the roughly 3,000 troops deployed. 1,500 or so from South Africa are supposedly there. 300 have been identified. And then the Rwandans came in partly because Emmanuel Macron had gone and sort of pushed his way both into Kigali. He knows President Kagame well and apologized for France's role in the 1994 genocide. And then push the Mozambicans. The French have islands very close to the Mozambican coast as well. And Total is, of course, a French company. And I think it's when you put that together, you get a sense, well, this is regional pressure points that are continuing to check back, but it's also Western and Chinese fossil capital that's probably really, pushing. There's a lot at stake for them. They've already put about $20 billion into the Fundi Peninsula near the town of Palma. And I think that's really why this kind of very, let's say very tentative and sensitive process of pressuring Mozambique to allow these troops to go in and try, they think, to sort out the problem. Don't forget we have one other major factor, which is Manuel Chang, the former Mozambique finance minister, who has been in an extradition hearing because of the corruption associated with major bank loans from Switzerland and Russia. And that's added to the question, is South Africa playing the role that the United States wants to extradite Chang to Washington to face prosecution, or will he be extradited to Maputo? And it's still up in the air. I mean, this is one of these moments where you see the sort of geopolitical stakes get higher and higher, and the sensitivity is very high, especially because South Africa had some unfortunate errors with its intelligence service, putting people behind the lines, and they were captured by Mozambicans, by the army last year, and Robert McBride was very embarrassed by that. He was then heading the intelligence service internationally. It's a mess.
You've written an interesting piece, Global North, Climate Reparations to Prevent Southern Fossil Fuel Conflict. What's your message in the main in writing this?
You know, Peter, it's really the same message that the South African government brought to Glasgow in mid-November. You might remember there was a deal done with Eskom to get 131 billion rand, effectively to leave fossil fuels underground in exchange for financial concessions. And that same principle that the North should pay Mozambique not to extract the gas, that's a climate debt that the North, and let's be frank, South Africa owes to Mozambique. They've had these terrible climate catastrophes, ranked number 4 in the world for devastating attacks, you know, in terms of the climate change, the cyclones and droughts since 2000. So 4th worst hit country. And the idea really, it's one that civil society have put forward, groups like the Southern African People's Solidarity Network, South African Federation of Trade Unions, Women in Mining, and from Mozambique, groups like Justice Ambiental and rural women's groups. And they've said, look, why don't we leave this fossil fuel store underground? This is a source of so much trouble. And then we should really be paid our climate debt as a compensation. Now, that financial support shouldn't go to the likes of a sort of an Eskom, which there's some, you know, dispute about what that 131 billion rand will do, but instead should go directly to people. There's an idea that's probably going to be adopted here next month, the basic income grant. If Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana gives, whether it's 350, as possibly will happen, according to yesterday's ANC speech by President Ramaphosa, or 1,500, which is the demand from social movements. But a basic income grant could go to ordinary people. Now, the point of that strategy there, as well as here, is to calm the social unrest and to try to make up for the terrible looting, the terrible inequality. That basic income grant is a redistributive strategy. It's been tried. Namibia has done it very well in one particular area, Ochivera. And I think, Peter, it's that kind of combination where the climate must be raised. Many of the commentators are a bit climate unconscious. And the North's climate debt to leave that very dangerous methane gas underground, and particularly not to bring it into the South African electricity system, huge potential investments or Wild Coast or Atlantic Coast drilling. And it's in that sense that this would be a win-win approach. And it's one that civil societies promoted from the left side, the green side, the social justice side. And I would hope that the meeting in Malawi begins to become more creative than simply rolling over a system, one that the United States perfected, if you will, which is to put lots of troops into countries with lots of fossil fuels, suffer lots of casualties, do lots of damage, and never really sort out the problem.
I mean, this is a great idea, but sadly, often human beings get in the way of great thinking. And I've got a feeling that I look at the United Arab Emirates. They found this black gold underground, and it changed everything, didn't it? I mean, it really, really created a whole new world. And I suppose that there are many African countries with the same kind of dreams that are saying, we've got this resource, this could change the game for us as much as it did countries in the Middle East. And that the idea of income grants compared to these riches, they're probably leaning towards the idea of digging this stuff up, selling it, and making billions in the process. How do we balance these ambitions and start to talk and think the way that you're talking about climate change and keeping this stuff underground? It's almost like burying gold and treasure underground.
Well, unless you're compensated. And the original strategy came actually from Ecuador, from the Amazon. And there were actually northern governments prepared, Italy and Germany and Norway, to actually make some contributions to the Ecuadorian fiscus to avoid, in a place called Yasuni, the extraction. Now, it didn't work out well that time. But you know, when someone like Andre de Ruyter from Eskom is able to persuade northern financiers that they should give concessional finance so that we leave our coal in Mpumalanga underground and we don't burn it in the Eskom power plants there, well, I think if South Africa is doing it, we should be very much promoting this for our neighbors. And the reason is that this idea that you've articulated so well, that this is black gold, this is the riches that'll make us another United Arab Emirates, this is not happening. And it hasn't happened anywhere on this continent, partly because multinationals have such an easy time in corrupting, including the ones, let's be frank, Total, ExxonMobil, INI from Italy, China National Petroleum, and then we've just seen Shell pushed out from the Wild Coast by some communities with lawyers. They're going to be contested with their local ally, which is Impact, HCI, Johnny Copeland's network with ENCA and Sogo Sun. All of that will be in the mix. And I think it is really, as you say, it's about raising consciousness and people saying we actually value the climate, we value marine conservation, we value local communities, we value ecotourism possibilities, and we'd like to see a just transition so that the fossil fuel isn't developed. Mozambique, above any African country, deserves a climate debt to be paid. We needed to leave those fossil fuels underground, and Mozambicans have already pretty much shown that the elites will loot from ordinary people and take these resources, and the ordinary person in a Cabo Delgado will never see them. And I think that's why all of these arguments come together, but perhaps most poignantly, Peter, is that it's very hard to stop a guerrilla war, whether it's Islamic or left-wing guerrillas, whatever the guerrilla war is, when those forces are well ensconced in communities and their grievances are profound. And there's no justice to be had simply by bringing in foreign troops and trying to put them down.
Well, let's hope that our heads of state and government look at this problem in a fresh way. I think it was Einstein who said that a higher level of thinking is required than that which created the problem in the first instance. And we pray for that. Thank you so much, Professor Patrick Bond. Always good talking to you.
Likewise, Peter. Thanks.
Thank you.